Let us now turn to our final keynote session of today. In the recent years, we have seen authoritarian tendencies on the rise, not only in Europe, but all over the world. What is the nature of this threat, its sources, and what are the best ways for friends of liberty around the world to face it? Joining us for this conversation is Zoltan Kesz, a former independent MP in Hungary and currently government affairs manager at the Consumer Choice Center. Let me also welcome back to the stage Tom G. Palmer, Executive Vice President for International Programs at the Atlas Network, and someone with perhaps the most extensive first-hand experience with populist and authoritarian regimes around the world. The session will be chaired by Ross Powell. Aaron is the founder of libertarianism.org by the Cato Institute and currently the host of ReImagining Liberty podcast, where he frequently covers many of the topics we are about to discuss. Please, Aaron, take over.
Thank you. Is this on? Everyone can hear me? Good. Okay. Thank you for joining us on this incredibly important topic that seems to become more important every day and spread in more dire ways every day. Hopefully we can understand it a bit better after tonight's discussion and offer some tools for combating it, as well as maybe some points of hope. But to get started, I want to steal a line from Tom from one of his prior panels, and maybe we can just ask some of you to tell us what you want to hear from us, what you are hoping to learn about the rise of authoritarian populism. Give us a sense of what we should talk about. So can we have
The reason why I'm here and why I want you to talk about populism and authoritarianism is very simple. I want to learn how to fight it. It's so simple because in my country there will be election after this big summer break, and it will be election between a populist government and a normal government, I dare to say, and it's so important for my country and of course my fellow students and everybody here that we will win the election against the populists, and I just want you to tell me how to fight it. You fought it, and I want to learn how to fight it. It's so simple, nothing else. Thank you.
Where are you from?
Czech Republic, here.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay. Okay, good. Thank you. I want to start, as I think we often should in cases like this, with defining terms, because there are a number of terms that get used when we're describing the phenomena that we're here to talk about, and they sometimes get used interchangeably. So I'll start by asking the two of you, what do we mean by authoritarianism? What do we mean by populism? And then the other one that's become increasingly relevant is, what do we mean by fascism?
All right, so we've got about an hour and a half here. No, not seriously. Let me start with populism, and it's a term that's been used a number of ways. Of course, it comes from the notion of the people, the populace. Some people confuse it with being popular. All politicians, in fact, all people want to be popular in some way or another. That's not what it's about. There was a populist party in the United States that was an agrarian, sort of semi-socialist party that had a certain appeal, set up the farmers as the fundamental producers. That sense of populism has dropped out of common usage. The term today refers to a kind of ideology. And it's an ideology that articulates the true people. And as Ernesto Laclau, one of the most clear expositors of this view in his book on populist reason. He was a Peronist Marxist who became a post-Marxist defender. He and his wife Chantal Mouffe, both of whom are students of Carl Schmitt, the Nazi theorist, legal theorist. And they argue that it posits a true people and the enemies of the people. This is very important. The enemies of the people. And as he puts it, it creates a frontier of exclusion within the population such that the people does not constitute the entire population of the country, because it's the people and the enemies of the people. The enemies of the people can be defined differently in different countries or contexts. It can be the Jews, it can be, in the United States, the M&Ms, the Mexicans and the Muslims. It can be the 1%, it can be an ethnic minority, it can be a religious group, it can be a shadowy conspiracy of Jewish bankers. All of these are possible definitions of the enemy. It can shift. And so the ideology of populism is to posit the true people who have one true interest, identity, and voice. The voice is the one leader who gives voice to the people's will against the enemies of the people. So that's a populism in a nutshell. And we see a variety of different countries. Whenever you hear the term enemy of the people, your ears should perk up, that this is a populist appeal. Authoritarianism, of course, refers to those governments that exercise will rather than rule. And I think this is an important distinction for us. As James Harrington put it, what we need is an empire of laws and not of men. To be ruled by the same law as equal citizens is a liberal ideal. But to be ruled by will and power is the authoritarian conception. Sometimes, of course, they will frame it as rule of law, but an alternative way of thinking of this is rule by law rather than rule of law. The law is turned into an instrument of power, which we see in authoritarian states. And then fascism is a somewhat more complicated term. George Orwell pointed out years ago that it had been drained of meaning in popular discourse. It just meant things I don't like. You call that fascism. But in its historical experience, fascism refers to that notion coming from the fasces, which is a bundle of sticks, that you can break one stick, but the bundle of sticks cannot be broken. So it's a collectivist idea at the very core of it. It's about collective strength, the strength of the state representing the people. And then, and Mussolini and Benedetto Croce and other fascist theorists, not Croce, but Gentili, pardon me. Apologies to all the Italians in the audience. But Giovanni Gentili's formulation that the state is that institution that exercises power to mediate among the corporate bodies of the society, the farmers, the business owners, the military, the church, and so on, and so that it concentrates power and then treats the constituent elements of society as corporate bodies rather than as citizens, which again, the liberal approach is a citizen-based polity. So those are, I think, three definitions that are not that contentious, but might help us to navigate this territory.
Well, let me add a couple of things on a more practical side of what it's like to live in an authoritarian or totalitarian state. I have lived my past 15 years in Viktor Orbán's Hungary as a former think tank leader. Then I became a politician. Then I went back to the think tank world. And now, just 3 weeks ago, fresh news, I've just left Hungary. So I'm living in Spain at the moment for different political reasons. But on the more practical side on how authoritarian or populist governments work, in my opinion, when you look at Russia, when you look at Slovakia, Hungary, Serbia, Georgia, just to mention a couple of countries from Europe, Turkey as well, there is a common playbook that we can all see in all these countries. This is something that the new administration in the US is also trying to follow at the moment. According to this playbook, I call it the playbook to dismantle democracy. And in this playbook, it's very clearly seen how in these countries the rule of law is clearly dismantled. what they are doing to independent media. As I mentioned in the other panel that I participated in my home city where I lived in Hungary, I did not have access to independent radio. I did not have access to independent print press, for example, and civil society. Foreign agent laws coming into effect in many countries, Georgia, Turkey, Hungary, Slovakia, warning my Czech friends here about their next elections coming this year, about what might happen here if the wrong people are chosen. Tom mentioned the ruling by the law. It's like in Hungary, in the past 9 years, we've seen ruling by executive orders. We don't need a parliament. I don't even know why there is a parliament in Hungary. Orbán Viktor wakes up one night, the next day it's a law. He wakes up the following night and he reverses the law. This is what we've been living in. And as the enemy of the people in my country, because I have been named as the enemy of the people, I want to argue a little bit with Tom in connection with the ideology part. He mentioned it's the ideology of the true people, if that's what you mentioned. Yes, but also it's the ideology of having no ideology. It's the ideology of loving power and loving money. It's the ideology to rule over others. I don't want to go into details how the European Union enabled Hungary of Viktor Orbán's rule for the past 15 years. It's history now. However, we should find a common solution on how to deal with it. Because in Europe, in the European Union, and most of you live in the European Union, Hungary is causing problems. Viktor Orbán's, always say, trolling causes problems. There are problems with the institutions in the European Union that allow such a populist person to always, be the not only one who goes against the other 26. So this is very, very important. I also mentioned the love for money as the ideology. We have a saying in Hungary, we have the so-called "what's in it for me" politicians. These are people on the second, third, or fourth line of this patronage system, because there is a true patronage system in politics now. People who are involved in politics, especially on the government side, they are interested financially in how they run the country, how they run their constituency, how they run their villages, and so on. So you hear it a lot from politicians, okay, I will do it for you, but what's in it for me? What's the deal? Does that sound familiar? What's the deal? We've heard that a lot from America as well. So actually, in my opinion, when we talk about populism and we want to do something about it, here with all these students, with all the experts, we should try to find a common solution that will satisfy everybody. Okay, so I want to come to a more positive outcome in about 30 minutes, so let's also talk about that.
So you talk about the appeal of it to, it is clear why authoritarian populism appeals to Viktor Orbán. He likes the power, he likes the money. Authoritarian leaders like this. Donald Trump enjoys being the center of attention, he enjoys receiving money, he enjoys telling people what to do and having them grovel in front of him. But he got elected. Orbán got elected. Populist authoritarians get elected. What is the appeal of this to the people who aren't the politicians? Why do people sign up for this in the first place?
Okay, the answer is quite simple. First of all, he has been ruling for 15 years. So 15 years ago, we had a terrible socialist government, which even 15 years ago, I voted for Fidesz because we thought that, you have to kick out this socialist government and maybe something good will come out of it. Back then, Viktor Orbán was a liberal. He then became, in a way, before that he was a communist youth member, but, politicians change. So, back then, so 2010, I understand why he got elected, because people were fed up with the socialists. However, good question, Aaron, why he got elected later on. And he knew that he wasn't going to be elected under normal circumstances. And that's when I come to the playbook that I mentioned. And one aspect that I did not mention, and that is to change laws, change the constitution, change the election law. every 4 years, the number of people that voted for Orban actually got lower and lower. However, he still got 2/3 majority, even with 40% of the votes, because that's how the law was made. So, in the previous panel, I mentioned that as far as Hungary is concerned, I'm not very optimistic, even if there is a very new party that is beating Fidesz in the polls. Because by the end of the day, Orban is going to change the law in order to have his own party come out as the winners. What appeals to the 2 million people who vote for him out of a population of 9.5? Well, a lot of people are interested financially. There are certain sectors of the society that have been very well rewarded from EU money. So all these grants that we got in the EU, I mean, Hungary has been the second best recipient of EU money in the past, 20 years. And a lot of people have benefited from it, one thing. The other thing, local politicians. As I mentioned, the patronage system, local politicians who are at the bottom of this food pyramid are the ones who control when you go into the polling booth. There are certain nice things. My Georgian friends could also tell you similar stories about what happens when in villages people vote. It's all democratic. You don't see it. But for example, when they have to take a picture of who you voted for, and that's how you will get your subsidy the next day, is that democratic? Definitely not.
Let me add a few thoughts. So Zoltan thought he was disagreeing with me, but he was actually refining a point. And that is an ideology of the true people, but it's plastic. It can be molded for the use of the political authorities, the ones who use it. It's a tool for power. And Laclau is very clear about this. He says the fundamental unit of political interaction is the demand. I want it. I demand it. And a collection of these can be incoherent. We look at it and say, it doesn't make any sense. They want this and this and this, and you can't have all those things. They're contradictory. It doesn't matter. In his horrible book, by the way, I read it so you don't have to. It's unreadable trash. But he calls it the empty signifier. And I finally realized after I read, what does he mean, the empty signifier? It's Mussolini. It's Juan Perón. It's Donald Trump. It's Viktor Orban. That is what gives unity to the collection of demands. And they're focused on the enemy, combating the enemy and representing the true people. So now the question, the very powerful question, which Aaron, I'd like you to answer as well, because you've thought a lot about this cultural dimension. I think one of the things that the voters get when they vote, and it's not all, remember, any winning coalition is a coalition of voters. They have lots of different reasons for supporting this party or candidate. We should always keep that in mind coming to this question, how can we defeat them? We always have to remember it's a disparate coalition of voters. Find those who can be peeled away from the authoritarian power. But one of the core things that motivates what in America they call the base, the MAGA base, is resentment, a feeling of dislocation, of not being in your own country where you were once the top dog and now you see other people are doing well. Karen Stenner has addressed this in her book on the dynamics of authoritarianism. She's a political psychologist, very interesting. And she argues that there are triggers for authoritarianism, contrary to the post-World War II literature that tried to explain fascism and National Socialism by positing an authoritarian personality. She says this doesn't exist. Aaron is not an authoritarian personality, but he might be triggered to be one by threats to his life and threats to his status. And this is inside all of us. We all could be triggered to authoritarianism. And when your social status relative ranking falls, which has happened in a number of countries, to Caucasian men who didn't go to college, they're economically better off than their fathers and grandfathers, undeniably. But their relative social status fell. Why? Women rose in social status. They run big corporations. They're heads of government. People of different races rose. United States, African American became president. Minority groups rose in status, et cetera, et cetera. It meant someone fell in relative status, not absolute condition continues to go up, but their relative status fell, and they don't like it. And populists can appeal to that resentment as a core motive for hating the enemy, those people who came into our country, and now I don't have the respect that my father had as a higher order in the pecking rank. So I think there's this psychological dimension that we need to understand and be able to counter it and show the advantages of liberalism. But I want to ask Aaron, because you've thought deeply about these cultural roots of populism.
Yeah, so I like the idea of the empty signifier, because in semiotics, a signifier points to a signified to create the sign, which is meaning. And very much, I mean, the experience with Donald Trump, especially in this last election, was people voted for him thinking he was something. And that something was not necessarily what he was, and in fact was very opposite of what he was. You know, we're watching now his popularity plummet as people realize that he's actually doing all of the things that he said over and over again he was going to do during the campaign, but they didn't believe it. They thought, oh, he's actually going to do these good things, or he's like a vessel for my particular grievances, but not the grievances of those people over there who I disagree with. And so they invested him with a meaning, and then it turned out, in practice, the meaning didn't, the signifier did not point to the signified they had in mind. I think Tom is correct that a lot of this is status. I don't think it's economic status. That when Trump won the first time, there was a lot of economic anxiety is the thing that explains this. But say I think the most Trumpist demographic you can find in the United States is auto dealership owners who are not poor, but they tend to be the wealthiest people in small towns and rural areas. And so they didn't lose out economically, but how did their status drop? Well, their status dropped, as Tom mentioned, because liberalism made women rich. And when liberalism made women rich, women were free to choose to live the kinds of lives they wanted to, which often didn't involve settling for an abusive lout. It involved not settling for someone who was not going to work, someone who was going to treat them poorly. And it turns out there's a lot of men who want to do that, and suddenly they felt lower status. Or women entering workforces that used to be primarily male. Or, I mean, you can trace the ideological origins of Trumpism and the movement to Gamergate. Trump began with video games. That was the online movement that spawned then the meme culture, and then Trumpism was men upset that women started playing video games, which they saw as a traditionally like a male space, and not just that there were women playing it, but that the women came in and were then critiquing. They're doing fairly standard feminist critiques of the way that women were presented, the way gender was presented, the way relationships were presented in video games, and this was extremely upsetting because it's not just that women were in a space that men felt high status, but women were critiquing that space. They were bringing down the status. They were criticizing in what were, if you were familiar with media criticism, were fairly banal ways. I mean, they were true, like the feminist critiques of these video games, there was a lot of truth to them, but there was nothing new in this. It was just a space that was not used to being challenged. This shows up too in kind of the cancel culture panics. There were some people who were canceled unjustly, but by and large, it was just powerful men suddenly being challenged, told their behavior was inappropriate, told that one of the perks of success was no longer that you get to sexually harass your secretary. And they didn't like it because that was one of the things you get when you are successful, is you get to behave in these ways. And so at least in the US, the experience was very much that. It was, I might not have had much. You know, there's this phenomenon of last place avoidance, where the people who are closest to the bottom but not quite at it will fight tooth and nail to prevent the people from the bottom rising up. Because if you're second to the last, at least you're not last, and that's something that you can cling to. And so when groups that had been at the bottom socially started to climb, that was very intimidating, very unsettling, created a lot of anxiety. And so Trump came in, and this is the message of the populist, and this is the message of the authoritarian, is, look, I will put the social structure back in place where you are comfortable. We'll abolish DEI, because it's DEI that's lowering the status of men. We'll force women back into the home. We'll have kind of our pronatalism trad policies, because we want women back in the home having kids and not in the workforce showing you up. I will crack down on that. I'll drive out the immigrants. The difference, one of the major triggering effects that Karen Stenner, that Tom mentioned, talks about is just exposure to difference. Like, there are some people who, when they're exposed to enough difference or pace of change, it is incredibly threatening to them, and they trigger onto an authoritarian who says, I'll put a stop to that. I'll put things back the way they were, or at the very least, I'll slow it down or stop the change. And so I think it's that is the motivation. It's not, at least in the US, it was not economic. It was, culture is changing, and it's changing in ways that no longer have me in the privileged position I was in, and I don't like it.
Can I add a point on that? And that is, first off, as a tool for power, populism is a tool to get power. And once you have the power, you can now dispense favors. This is already happening in countries that have experienced this, and it's happening in the US. Donald Trump is already dispensing exemptions from tariffs. I like you, I don't like you. You two get exemptions and you don't. So this is part of the playbook to get power, and then money. They want money. Let's just be very frank about this. These are greedy bastards, and they suck money out of the society. They're extremely corrupt, and they use populism as this tool to extract resources for themselves and for their cronies. But on this question then of the disorder, the way in which people feel that they're no longer in their normal place, they're discomforted, it's something we need to address, I think, as liberals. The most powerful images used by populists are usually images of disorderly others. So all the talk, if you remember on the Brexit vote and Nigel Farage in his campaign, images of a sea of brown people streaming into Europe. It was an invasion. The Syrians were invading. And the talk of the caravans coming from the south to the United States. Most of the immigrants, people who are, let's call them, illegally in the US or without documents, whatever term you want to use, they overstayed their visas. They didn't come across, sneaking across the border at night. They overstayed their visas. But most people don't know that, because they see on the populist news channels like Fox News images, disorderly people rushing across the border, chaos enveloping us. And I think that's why we need to address migration issues by stressing orderly procedures, so that people perceive migration not as a stream of people invading the country, which is the weapon that the populists use to weaponize the migration issue, but instead make it easier to get into the country and get work. It's incredibly difficult in most places to go there and actually become gainfully employed and produce consumer surplus for the society and enrich the society, as Leszek Balcerowicz said the Ukrainians have done in Poland. Poland would have been declining had it not been for all those Ukrainians. The Poles did it correctly. They let people come in, get a stamp, and you can be part of the economy. Most Europe and United States, it's very difficult to come in and become a contributor. So we can address this by saying, let's make it easy to come in and contribute to the society, and do it in a way that is perceived as orderly rather than a chaotic invasion, which has driven a lot of the populist rage and anger, because they perceive these waves of foreigners like invading armies. And you'll find consistently this is how the populist leaders portray them, as alien invaders.
Just want to add something to what Tom said. This is also what we experienced in Central Europe in connection with the Slovakian elections. When the campaign started, we saw a flood of immigrants coming from Hungary, all these, I don't know how they got there, on the Hungarian-Slovakian border, but for 7 weeks during the campaign, they were flooding Slovakia. After Fico won, day one, no more immigrants. But before we come to the Q&A, let me try to give a positive note in connection with how I feel about populism and what you should do, as a lot of students hear about populism, and how to fight populism, because we need to fight it. Okay? So that, I think we all agree on it. We see a lot of, like for example in Tom, I always see that he's very passionate about József Eötvös and other classical liberal thinkers of Hungary. Or my other friend Mate sitting there, he's very passionate about children's book, for a free market children's book. My other friend sitting there, Alberto, passionate about vaping. But there is one thing you are all passionate about, or you should be passionate about. And this thing is, in my opinion, the most attractive thing when you talk about politics, and that's liberty. And yes, we should all be passionate about liberty, because without liberty, we are not free, you are not free. And as we all mentioned here, populists are rising. They are on the rise, they've been on the rise. And they promise you everything and anything, but they don't deliver. And they say, as Aaron said, they will fight for you. Fight for your right, fight for your family, protect you. I've been protected so many times in Hungary that I'm overprotected. But they actually fight for themselves and fight for power, like a constant campaigning for them. In the morning, Johan Norberg was referencing to Frodo, and I was thinking, okay, let's try to find another Lord of the Rings quote that fits this kind of passion that we have for liberty. And the way I feel now, coming from Central Europe, is when the orcs overran Osgiliath, and Faramir was saying, I have to quote here, "The city was once the pride of Gondor, now it's filled with fear. The city fell because the people abandoned it." Are we going to abandon liberty the same way? Because here, if I look around, I see this very great group of very young people, a lot of students, and a lot of them are afraid of entering politics. And it might sound strange from me, coming from politics in a way, but I encourage you to do it, because others will do it for you, and others will decide for you. Believe me, there are thousands of more people who would be happy to decide how you should live your lives and decide for you. And, you know, in my opinion, this group is the one, as a global group, that can save liberty on a global world. So don't just talk about it, you're good at it, fight for it. So that's my positive message for you, and I think we should go to questions as we have 10 more minutes left.
Sure.
Audience. Someone wants to
Just
run.
stand up and shout. You have the mic. Okay, good. And let's try to have questions short and answers short if we can.
Oh, I will try to. I want to touch on what you kind of talked about cancel culture, because I think there is something a bit more dark and a bit more nuanced about the polarization in the United States. I had the misfortune of working in academia when Trump got first elected, and people are actually being really bullied for, having the wrong having the wrong face expression. I had a problem once with a hammer and sickle. I was labeled a Trump supporter behind my back, and I was physically assaulted. And I think some cancel culture is people really being bullied, and at some point there are bullies versus bullies. Everybody is bringing out the worst in each other, and where's the stop to that?
Yes, so there absolutely is bullying, and people will use differences as an excuse. That's what bullies do. I think, Trump is quintessentially a bully. You can predict all of his behavior if you just treat him as a stereotypical bully. I think that the bullying is made worse by, this is one of the benefits of liberalism. I think liberalism is the antidote to bullying, because what liberalism says is you can live the way you want to, I'll live the way I want to, we can get along, and it's a positive sum. And the problem is that the populists create an atmosphere where they say, no, that's not possible. If that person over there gets ahead, you don't. And so now their difference is a threat to you, and you should bully them. And then the reaction to a lot of that is to then start bullying yourself. Because this person is now bullying me, I'm gonna bully them back. I now see the world more in a zero-sum way. And so I have noticed this. I noticed bullying from the left towards the right, bullying from the right towards the left. And they're both making each other worse. And the problem is right now, in this moment, it's hard to get out of that because everyone is legitimately a threat. You know, Trump is legitimately a threat to a very scary one to a lot of people. And so supporting that, it's hard to say like it's just a difference of opinion. But I think that has to be what happens. We have to just say, we have to send that message of liberalism of there are real threats. There are people where you should not treat them civilly. But that's not most people. And we have to just say like critical engagement or critical disengagement. You can walk away from the person if you disagree enough and not have anything to do with them, and that's okay, and very liberal too. Has to be the answer to that, but it's hard to break that cycle of just escalating bullying.
So thank you very much for your insights. My question goes against the grain a little bit, but I'm sure it's something you've been asked many times. Is there a context in which there would be such a thing as authoritarianism being a valid choice for a society? Perhaps in the case of war or an extreme economic crisis, the pilot navigating the plane through stormy weather rather than the passengers, so to speak.
Sure, let's get two more questions and then answer them in sequence.
Okay. Any other questions then? We'll just collect it. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Hi. So Zoltan mentioned that in 2008, I think, Orban was elected because the existing government was bad, right? Socialist. And you discussed why Trump was elected, and you mentioned a lot of reasons that I share, but what about the fact that, I mean, the existing government, so Biden, was pretty bad, and the opposition was also bad. Didn't that play a huge part in Trump's election?
One more, just one more, and then we'll...
Yep. I would like to ask about the special category of populists, which are coming from our bubble. The former free market and libertarian ideals propagating parties like AfD in Germany, Svobodní in Czech, Konfederácia in Poland, Libertarian Party in US. I would like to ask what went wrong with them.
Okay, that's great.
Do you want to take the first one about piloting the plane?
Yeah, okay, very tough ones. Legitimate authoritarianism, we discussed this in the Ukrainian context. If the option is to be conquered by something worse, it might be the least bad option. So that's the best, most I can say about that. Yeah, Biden was terrible. And then, but we got worse, in my opinion. And then finally, this question was, what was the last question there? Oh yeah, this is a deep question that many of us have puzzled over, and I think the key element was there are people who love liberty, and there are people who are just angry and pissed off all the time. And people who are angry and pissed off all the time are naturally collectivist. Because if you want to find the most pissed off group, it's the one who really hates other people. So if you're motivated by hate, you're going to end up a collectivist. You should be motivated by the love of freedom, and I think it's a different motivation.
I'll just add on the Biden administration because I think it's a good question. Biden did lots of bad things. lots of non-libertarian things. But if you poll the polls that came out after the election, people's grievances about Biden weren't often really about Biden. It was prices are higher now than they used to be. And inflation started under, that was not a specifically Biden thing. And in fact, inflation came down a fair amount, but people still remembered that when Trump was in office, prices were lower. And they thought that inflation coming down would mean prices go back to where they were. Young people, a lot of the swing of young people to Trump turns out to have been, they remember Trump as the before COVID times, and they remember Biden as when there was COVID. And they liked the before COVID times, and so they voted for Trump because they thought he would bring that back. So yes, there was a lot of bad stuff with Biden, but those swing voters who gave us Trump seemed to more just kind of have grievances about the state of the world that weren't necessarily Biden's fault than specifically rejecting Biden's actual policies.
I just want to make a very short comment about this. Like, this is, in a way, in my opinion at least, looking at it, trying to look at it objectively, but it's a technical question in a way. A lot of people, like Biden or FDP in Germany, they didn't understand the rule of the game. They didn't understand because it was the populists who wrote the rule of the game. What do I mean by that? A lot of parties that would like to represent liberals focused on a lot of things. This is not the 1990s anymore. We live in 2025 when messaging is totally different from 30 years ago. I remember when I was 20 years younger, we would enjoy watching a 90-minute video of Milton Friedman. You don't have 90 seconds. 9 seconds. The rules are different, one thing. The other thing is focusing. FDP in Germany was focusing on 29 different messages. AfD was focusing on 3. And when you look at how people consume the media, this is what sticks. In Germany, as far as liberty is concerned, Freiheit, libertarian voters say, I have the Freiheit, I have the liberty to decide who I want to live next to. I want to have the Freiheit to decide what car I want to drive to work. I don't want the Greens to tell me to, put my BMWs and Volkswagens away. I want to get my money in crypto. It's my liberty. And these are simple messages. AfD understood that. The liberal FDP did not understand that. And there are lots of different analyses about different countries, different parties, how messaging went wrong, but that's because they don't know the rule of the game.
Let me conclude then with a very important point here that Zoltan has raised, and Aaron. We need to address them and understand them and come up with better responses. And the burden is on us. So let me mention something. Many years ago, when I was at Liberty Groups, I would be the youngest person in the room. Today, I think I might be the oldest person in the room. There might be a few in my age group, but I think I'm the oldest person here. And I want to read to you a quote from J.R.R. Tolkien, since we are on these Lord of the Rings quotes, that I thought was very powerful. I wish it need not have happened in my time, said Frodo. So do I, said Gandalf. But that is not for them to decide. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given us. And your time is a time to stand up for liberty and to do a better job than my generation has done, to make sure that future generations live in equality of rights, in freedom, in peace, and prosperity. This is your time.